In Roman myth, death had a name, and that wasn't even his real name. He was known by many names, but ultimately they all boiled down to the same thing: Pluto, ruler of shadows, king of silence, lord of what lies beneath. In the terrifying tales of the ancient Romans, he was one of the most important gods in their pantheon. Yet at the same time, he was also one of the most feared. So who was Pluto? Why were the Romans so afraid of him? And how did he come to be one of the most powerful deities in Roman myth? Hi everyone, welcome to this house. Today we are going to be exploring the terrifying truths about Pluto, god of the underworld. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an exciting episode. Before we get into the chilling details about Pluto himself, let's first talk about where he came from. Like many other deities, Pluto's origins can be traced back to the ancient Greeks. In Greek mythology, Pluto was known as Hades. Now it's important to note that these two names technically refer to two separate individuals. However, since there was very little difference between them, if any at all, we're just going to lump them together for the sake of simplicity. The point is that Hades was the brother of Zeus and Poseidon, sons of the Titans Cronus and Rhea. When the great war between the gods and the Titans finally came to an end, it was decided that Hades would receive the Underworld, which was pretty fitting considering that he was the god of the dead. But he wasn't just the god of the dead, he was also considered the god of wealth. Not just in the sense that he controlled precious gems and metals that were mined from the earth, but also because he controlled the wealth of the afterlife. This is something that really needs to be explored further because it's the first of 5 chilling truths about Pluto. You see, when Hades was handing out domains among the brothers, Zeus got the sky, Poseidon got the seas, and Hades was left with the underworld. And while many might think that this was a bad deal, it actually wasn't at all. In fact, it made Hades the third most powerful deity in the entire pantheon. As the ruler of the underworld, Hades had control over every living person on Earth. Every single soul, upon its departure, would pass into his realm. Every single soul that came under his rule became his subject, and thus, Hades had the power to grant or withhold happiness in the afterlife to anyone that he pleased. Those who died rich would have their wealth taken from them and brought to the underworld, to be given out by Hades as he saw fit. The fact that Hades had control over the fates of countless souls, as well as access to the riches of the world, meant that he was unimaginably powerful, and with great power comes great responsibility, or at least it should. What exactly did Hades do with this power? Well, the answer depends on who you ask. Some say that Hades was just, maybe even a bit too fair. In his role as judge of the dead, he was impartial. He did not care whether a person had been good or evil, kind or cruel. When it was their time to die, he took their soul and sent them on their way. However, others tell a much darker tale, claiming that Hades used his power to steal away those whose beauty caught his eye. And while he might not have been picky about taking souls, he certainly was particular about who he took. Persephone, the daughter of Demeter, was abducted by Hades and forced to become his bride. Although she returned to her mother each year, leaving Hades alone in his dark kingdom, this was not his only victim. Helen of Sparta, the woman whose face launched 1,000 ships, was originally promised to Hades, but he allowed her to be taken by the Trojan prince Paris instead, believing that this slight snub was worth the poetic irony. There's no doubt that Hades was one of the most powerful gods in the Greek pantheon. But what about the Romans? Well, they didn't really have much use for the Greeks' explanation of the afterlife. And as such, they created their own version of hell, complete with its own devilishly handsome god. Now, don't get me wrong, the Romans weren't exactly opposed to the idea of an underworld. In fact, they believed that the dead had to travel through the underworld before moving on to the afterlife. What they didn't believe in was the idea that this journey through the underworld was quick and easy. For the Romans, the underworld was a long and dangerous trip, one that could take years to complete, and it was ruled over by one being, Pluto. Now again, Pluto wasn't really his real name. That honor went to the god of the sea, Poseidon. But when the Romans needed someone to blame for everything that went wrong, they looked to Pluto, the personification of evil. In fact, the Romans rarely prayed to Pluto. They feared him. If you wanted something, you didn't ask Pluto for help. You didn't want to draw his attention to yourself. Instead, the Romans tried to avoid angering him by following 3 simple rules. Don't mention his name, don't associate him with anything positive, and definitely don't build temples in his honor. Actually, scratch that last one. It turns out that the Romans did build temples in Pluto's honor, but they didn't build them above ground. See, there was a reason why the Romans avoided building temples to Pluto above ground. If you built a temple to any other god, it was a place of worship, somewhere that people went to pray and seek the divine favor. But if you built a temple to Pluto, that would just be an advertisement for your own demise. No one would ever go there willingly. It was better to build a temple to Pluto deep within the earth, far away from prying eyes, like the Regia, which was built deep beneath the city of Rome itself. So why were the Romans so afraid of Pluto? Well, for starters, he was the god of the underworld. And unlike Hades, who judged the dead impartially, Pluto showed no mercy. If you pissed him off, you could expect to spend eternity in the darkest pits of hell. But that wasn't the only reason the Romans feared him. You see, Pluto was also the god of wealth, and he was very protective of his coins. In fact, he was so protective that if anyone stole even one of his coins, Pluto would find a way to make their life miserable. He could turn their friends against them. He could cause their crops to fail. He could bring disease to their family. Basically, he could do whatever he wanted to make their lives as difficult as possible. And if that wasn't enough, Pluto was also the god of the harvest. If you pissed him off, you could expect famine to strike your city. Your fields would wither and die. Your livestock would fall ill. Basically, you would starve to death, along with everyone you loved. So yeah, you might want to watch what you say around here. The Romans knew that Pluto didn't want to be worshipped. In fact, they knew that he hated it when people said his name. They believed that by doing so, you invited him to come after you. And they were right. If you angered Pluto, you could count on him to come for you, sooner or later. And now for a little bonus fact that isn't quite as scary but is still pretty interesting. Do you know why Pluto was called by so many names? Well, it's because the Romans couldn't agree on what to call him. At first they called him Dis Pater, which literally means son of the father. Eventually, though, they dropped the dis and just called him Pater, which meant father. Then, as time went on, they started calling him Pluto, which might have been a corruption of the Greek word Plutus, meaning wealth. Finally, they started calling him by his true name, which was so terrible that I won't even say it here. The point is that the Romans couldn't decide what to call him, so they just went with whatever they felt most comfortable with at the time. And that's why Pluto is known by so many different names. That concludes our look at the chilling truths about Pluto. Now, it's time for you to make your voice heard. Comment below which part of this video scared you the most. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an exciting episode. Thanks for watching, everyone. See you next time.